But at this moment, I'm going to interrupt myself because NBC News can now project at this hour at 8:33 p.m., 7:33 Central Time, 8:33 in the East Coast, 7:33 Central Time, that former President Donald J. Trump will be the projected winner in the Iowa caucuses for the 2024 presidential election. Again, about 33 minutes after the doors closed in the Iowa caucuses, with very few actual results in, but based on the results that we do have and the entrance polling that we do have, NBC News now projects that Donald Trump will be, at the end of the night, the winner of the Iowa caucuses.
Well, no, Ryan Binkley, I'm glad that we know his name and that he got a chance to get a little bit of fame, having been mentioned by the great Rachel Maddow. But the previous woman, who the Trump surrogate, I wish she had not just loved it. I wish she had listed it. I wanted to hear what she was going to say, because I'm always curious when people say he did so much for us and he made America great again, like what specific policies they mean. Because the one policy that Donald Trump obviously passed was that massive, enormous tax cut. He didn't get the wall. He didn't do. I really am always curious as to what they actually mean by that. But I do think the evangelical thing that Alex was talking about, I think that is the story for the night. The fact that in 2016, these were Ted Cruz voters, you know, he kind of had the evangelical lane. In this particular race, it was Ron DeSantis who originally went hard for evangelicals. Remember the God Made a Fighter ad? He did the God ad first before Trump did. And he really was attempting to appeal directly to the souls of evangelicals. His whole strategy is Iowa. To be clear, Michael and I were talking about this, that his strategy is built around the idea that he would pull in Obama in Iowa and that he would pivot there. And even if he didn't win in New Hampshire, which is a state that's more built for Nikki Haley, he would then slingshot to South Carolina, where there is a similar percentage of evangelical voters. So he is the one that really has to win. To be honest with you, Nikki Haley doesn't need to win Iowa. It would be a nice thing for her to not win or to come in a reasonably decent, sort of respectable second. It's really Ron DeSantis for whom this is do or die. If he gets mopped tonight, he has to slink home to Florida, having done nothing. He put all of his eggs in this basket. But you heard, and Michael was talking, we were talking about this offline a little bit. You heard I don't remember who it was that was saying that Donald Trump has a better ground game this time than he did in 2016 when he lost
that county Republican chair was saying
to
that,
Ted Cruz. Right. So I think for Donald Trump, we knew this was going to be the outcome. But the person for whom tonight actually really does matter for their political future is really not Nikki Haley. It's Ron DeSantis.
Rich, if I could, two points on that. One, on the ground game. I think not enough attention has been paid to the fact that Donald Trump came into Iowa with a very different mindset than the one he had in 2016, obviously. From what I understand, he had not just a good ground game, but a very good ground game. So when Steve started putting up those numbers, you saw that ground game. You saw the turnout effort that his people were able to get in place. When you look at the weight of the percentage of participants in this caucus. So I take note of the fact that Nikki Haley is running third in terms of those entrance polls in most of those categories. As a chairman, as a party guy, I'm sitting there looking, I'm doing the math going, this tells me two things. Both Trump and DeSantis focused on the ground game that Nikki could not get in place. That's going to hurt her tonight if these numbers hold up based off the entrance. She very well could slide into third place because of that turnout model. The other side of that comes South Carolina, to the last point that you made, Joy, about evangelicals. Unlike Iowa, there's a greater percentage of evangelical voters in South Carolina, where almost 75% of every Republican who will vote is an evangelical voter. So that sets up an interesting challenge and dynamic for her, slinging out of Iowa, where she, if the numbers hold, runs into a third place wall, right?
Right.
With these voters.
I mean, to Joy's point, though, I mean, big picture, what we've got here is Donald Trump as the projected winner in Iowa. The question is what's going to happen between Haley and DeSantis. Ron DeSantis moved his national headquarters to Iowa, his super PAC, which is effectively running his campaign, all in Iowa and running his field operation there. Everything in the Ron DeSantis campaign has been geared toward him winning in Iowa. And he did build a ground game in Iowa. Trump did, too. But DeSantis's ground game in Iowa is the best of all the candidates. We've heard that over and over again. Nikki Haley didn't really start doing anything on the ground in Iowa until late November.
Right.
She was never expected to be competitive in Iowa at all because it isn't such a heavily evangelical electorate. The place where she's really expected to compete is in New Hampshire. But even if Haley comes in third tonight to DeSantis, I'd still rather be Nikki Haley coming out of Iowa, because Ron DeSantis is in single digits in every single other state in the country where he isn't at a zero. Right. And Nikki Haley is within single digits of Donald Trump in New Hampshire. And then she goes home to South Carolina,
where she's 30 points down.
She is way down, but at least people know her and she's got a ground game.
Yeah.
So you'd rather be her than him, even if he does beat her in Iowa tonight.
Nikki Haley seems to be facing two big roadblocks tonight. And by the way, from this point forward, I'm happy to cede the balance of my time, as they say in the Senate, to Iowa voters, because everything we've heard from the individuals that we've listened to there been really fascinating. You had that young Republican saying that Donald Trump did not build the wall. He knows that. You know, it's nice to hear that there are Republicans who know that. He's a DeSantis guy. But we heard the Trump supporter, the one Trump supporter we heard say, Donald Trump was chosen by God to be the person that he votes for tonight in Iowa. Now, if you want to talk about an insurmountable roadblock for other candidates, that could not be more clearly defined. And what was interesting to hear was the way he put it, which was that line about, you know, God sometimes makes strange choices. When I was a kid, the way they taught that in our Catholic theology, the phrase the nuns always used was, God moves in mysterious ways. And that is there all the time for that kind of deeply religious person to use any way they want. And whether Donald Trump made them do this or whether they wanted to find their way to be for Donald Trump, they have arrived at the spot where they believe that God has decided he should not just win the Iowa caucus, he should be president again, that he is God's chosen candidate. Nikki Haley's not going to be able to beat that anywhere.
One more, I think, just layer to add to the sort of what we're calling the evangelical vote is that, you know, the Times did a good piece about this about a week and a half ago about, you know, that category itself is pretty capacious. And particularly within Republican Party politics, you have people that are regular church attendees, right? They're connected to a church. They might go to Bible study. They are enmeshed in the life world of worship. And then there are people who call themselves evangelicals who are basically unchurched, who don't go to Sunday services, who are not connected to a church. That portion has been one of the biggest growth areas for Trump. There's a whole great Times piece talking to those voters, people that identify evangelical both spiritually and politically as a sort of hybrid identity, and that has been a big part of the Trump growth as well.